Hi, Priya. Welcome to the Voice of Gen C podcast. It's great to have you here. Been a big fan of all your work and who you are, and just welcome to Climbs.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Annie. It's a pleasure to be here. Likewise, fan of your work at Climbs too. So excited to finally be doing this podcast together.
Can we start by talking about how you and I met?
Sure. Yeah. I have my version. I don't know if you have your
Yeah, give
version.
us your version.
Um, well, we were introduced by a mutual friend over email, and then we met, I think, in November last year, so basically a year ago. And then we reconnected on SAS Mafia in about, I think it was May or June this year after I gave my talk, and I was very, warmly welcomed into the SAS Mafia community and the director community and director organization or group. And I'm a very proud member of that group, and I might get a chance to meet with you every week to talk about our strategy on SAS Mafia. So I'm really grateful about that.
Yes, so Priya actually wears multiple hats, which is incredible. Obviously, she's a managing partner and director of Theia Ventures, which is a climate tech and climate tech only venture fund in India, and fast becoming a really big preference for climate founders too, to definitely have Theia on their cap tables. And along with that is a co-director to me at SAS Mafia. And so lovely to have you be in a way a colleague as well, not just like a mentor but a colleague. Uh, and along with that, the third hat I would add is you're the creator of GenC. You are the one who coined the term GenC earlier in the year, and it just kind of stuck. And we couldn't use it in the way that we had planned initially, but sure enough, clients found a way to actually take it to market and utilize it in a way which is put a label on this climate movement that's happening, right? Of consumers and consumer brands and enterprises and even venture funds who are opting into like wanting to do something about climate change, right? So thank you very much for putting that term together too. This is our effort to really identify who are the Gen Z folks out there in the market.
Great. No, it was a nice coincidence that we were, I think, in the middle of a brainstorming session and it just occurred to me. But yeah, happy to unpack that, go through any sort of thoughts, concepts that you would like to, and share my views also on the emerging space.
Absolutely. So how do you describe Gen Z? Like, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, so Gen Z is essentially, the voice of the next generation that is very clear and very kind of, has a shared warning signals to the older generation about the impacts of climate change and how, it's sort of a decade-long problem that really needs to be resolved, and the time is really now. So I think, I would say that there is no real year of where you can, or the decade where you can identify where a Gen Z would be born. But I would say, we are all Gen Zs in the way in which we approach how aware we are about climate change. I think, the folks that have at least 60 years left or 70 years left on this earth are going to be much more affected than those who have less time. So I think the main objective with Gen Z is to give everyone a sort of mission, a kind of, calling card to sort of underscore the fact that we are running out of time to save the planet. There should be, awareness about this through and through, whether it's industry policy, kind of startups, venture, other capital providers, and we should take action now.
I love that line that we are all Gen Z,
Yeah.
right? We're not just Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. It's not ethnography. It's not a demography. It's age independent. It's race independent. It's sexual preference independent. It could be anybody out there. And somewhere we're all Gen Z. We all care for climate change and like to help do playing our part. But we just need to know a way, like how. Right? And I think that's why, like, when you and I were first brainstorming on this a while ago, there were a bunch of jokes around like the rise of Gen Z, right? And the Gen Z like awakens. This force awakens, right? Like the Star Wars reference.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool that like we all are Gen Z, but we're just waiting to figure out how do we play our part, right?
Yeah.
And it's starting to like really pick up steam,
Yeah.
right? So what do you think are the common traits that define folks who would self-qualify themselves in the Gen Z? Individual people who self-qualify.
Yeah, so there's a couple. I mean, as I've mentioned before, I think to you, the climate really pervades almost every aspect of life. It's not just about the energy transition and renewables. It's really about all your preferences. So as a consumer, how you define, the kind of way that you travel, your mobility choices, your clothes choices, your food choices, how you kind of end up qualifying what you would like to do with your life, what kind of causes you would like to dedicate yourself to, how you would like to give back, what kind of sort of roles that you would want to play in larger organizations, etc. So I think a truly, I mean, there's kind of varying degrees of Gen C, but I think what really stands out with a lot of the Gen C folks that I think would self-qualify is their kind of, unilateral focus on solving the climate issues and making others aware of it and making it kind of more of a full-time, all-encompassing kind of mission. So these are folks that actually work in climate tech sectors or have started companies. On the side as well, they run initiatives like Assess Mafia or like others, community building initiatives to help raise awareness. And then also are, helping to convert various folks in their community, whether it's family, friends, professional contacts, etc. And then are pretty vocal about it through, public media, social media, etc. And then, even those that might venture into protest territory as well. But there's, I think there's just a general sense of kind of strong mission identification of it, and then being vocal about what to do and how to sort of execute and be action oriented about it.
So caring, then having intent to do something, and then action. Right?
Yes.
All three
Yeah.
have to sum up for somebody to be qualified as Gen Z, in your opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in some ways, it's tough to always have the ability to take action, right? Like somebody could be, sort of living in a society where there's a little bit less awareness about it, or in a geography where, they can't really galvanize as much support, or they're in a role which is, kind of not really linked to a climate role or that kind of thing. So it might be a little bit challenging for others. But I do think that the ability to kind of band together has become a lot easier in the last few years through obviously digital means and digital communities, etc. So there's always a way to connect with folks that think in a similar fashion. And that's why digital communities are so great. So I think there's definitely ability to do action, not maybe, physically going out there and spending that time, but to at least to interact and to kind of foster that kind of community and knowledge together.
Yeah, and this is where I think there's a line we share, we agree upon too, which is small enough to do, big enough to matter. Mm-hmm. Right? It doesn't have to be some grand gesture of going in, not flying at all, or getting an electric car as your first climate positive decision. Right? That's a big decision, right?
Yeah.
How about making it smaller and easier and more fun to do? Mm-hmm. And I think there's so many choices like that. Like joining a community, playing your part within that is one. Practicing more sustainable methods in your own household, telling your own family members is another way, right?
Yeah.
Making more climate positive career choices, like you said, is another way. There's so many routes for people to actually just say that I care and I want to do my part, right? And it's really, really wonderful to see that kind of explode in the last 2 years, because now is the need of the hour for individuals to step up, right? But what about brands, consumer brands, the companies we buy our products and services from?
Yeah, so I think there needs to be a fundamental shift in thinking in these brands to actually cater towards more carbon neutral and climate friendly products. So it comes from the very sort of basics of procuring the materials, manufacturing, developing the right type of sales mechanisms, etc. And then how you kind of also brand yourself, and we've all heard the word greenwashing and so I think that's something that every brand does not want to be associated with. But I think there is, a set of brands that I admire particularly that have done this done the actual transition to climate neutral or carbon neutral, type of beer, like a Patagonia, for example, that has been really inspiring to watch. And I just wish there were more companies like that, where it really comes from the overall mission, as I mentioned, from the top, and the ability to kind of drill down that authenticity of let's drive this towards climate change. Let's really understand that a lot of our processes have been, heavily emissions, inducing, and we need to change them and then adopt different practices, and then really, really fundamentally change the sort of workings of what we do before we then market it to consumers. So I think there are definitely brands that are spearheading this movement, but there are quite a few that are still have a long way to go.
Patagonia is one of my favorite brands too. I think
Yeah.
from the very beginning, they stood for adventure and planet, right? Adventure, planet, and profit just was happenstance because they want to grow as a business too. And I think that has become the new DNA for businesses of the future, right? People, purpose, planet, profit, right? And that's kind of the DNA of even of Theia, interestingly enough.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the role of venture funds in this GenC, ecosystem creation and in the movement?
Yeah,
Particularly,
absolutely.
specifically like venture funds overall, and specifically Theia within.
Sure. No, absolutely. I think Theia, being a climate tech venture fund, definitely has this concept sort of front and center. We are a B2B investor, so we generally, are not super close to the consumer mindset when we're looking at evaluating companies and bringing them into our portfolio. But I would generally say that, even the founders that we're working with, we want them to be very much aware of the impact of their solution, how it can be sort of scaled up, what is the kind of aversion of carbon dioxide that they're sort of predicting and forecasting in their metrics. And I think the depth on that, as well as the depth on the technologies that they're trying to build, really for us serve as a guiding metric or a guiding kind of benchmark on how strongly we want to basically be involved with them as investors. And then once they're in our portfolio, I think the idea is basically to help grow and scale these businesses, help connect them to other folks, either other investors or other ecosystem providers and industry players as well, and then help them figure out that whole process of being as close to the climate green ecosystem as possible. So I think that's where we end up looking at it from a founder angle and the way in which they're growing their businesses. I think that's similar to perhaps some other venture funds as well that are looking at investing in companies with a specific thesis around making sure that climate is front and center of the kind of value proposition that they're trying to work out.
And that's such a high leverage, entry point, right, toward driving this change and enabling this movement, this GenC movement in society. Because when you're bringing in capital, you actually have a lot of leverage, right?
Yeah.
So right from the very beginning, instilling that DNA. One is looking for founders and solutions that are looking to solve the problem of climate change. And two is instilling that DNA into companies that may not already have that, right, as a core priority, and then making it a core priority. Funds in the market that are actually doing that with their portfolio companies. And it's incredible that they are becoming the voice of change, right, and mediums of change within their own portfolio companies. So I think it could come from both sides. It's right from point of origin, or even from even into mature companies and actually nudging them toward just adopting more sustainable practices. Right. So I think in that vast market now that's growing, and every climate fund has, we were joking about it, but like an ecosystem mapping going on. And
yes,
everyone has their thesis of what climate tech is. Theia really does have an interesting position as being a very, very early stage fund, purely focused on B2B, right? But starting to build a brand is a founder's choice. How are you doing that?
Yeah, no, that's very kind of you to say. We're trying, I think our initial hypothesis was basically to get really deep into the sectoral understanding of what actually constitutes climate. So before we even started investing, the idea was to basically build a very deep sector mapping exercise of 9 sectors within climate, 9 subsectors rather, and then 3 subsectors within circular economy, and go very deep into what are the sort of main regulatory features of these subsectors. So basically within electric electric mobility, whether it's fleet management or OEMs or ride sharing or battery tech or charging infrastructure. What are the different kind of demand and supply factors, regulatory factors? What have been the great companies operating in this space outside India, whether it's US, Europe, Southeast Asia, etc.? What kind of Indian companies are early and rising? What funding have they raised? And so doing this sort of sector mapping exercise, which took us like a good chunk of time, about 2 to 3 months, has really helped inform our understanding before we even go into a conversation with a founder. So we're very well informed about the sector, about its potential pitfalls, about the market opportunity, and about that founder's ability to address that market opportunity. So that helps us, assess the founder market fit, the product market fit, etc. And will this really work in India? And then I think that's where we've, sort of taken a step forward and developed these thought leadership pieces over the last year or so in different sectors. So whether it's carbon markets, or whether it's energy storage, or whether it's smart grid, and then we're building a few in prop tech as well. So the idea is basically to kind of demonstrate and share with the ecosystem our knowledge, our research. We have a bunch of sector experts in our network as well from industry that can help advise us on particular aspects, very niche aspects within these subsectors. And so that really kind of hopefully helps founders realize that we are actually an investor that tries to know their stuff before coming to a meeting and wants to ask informed, intelligent questions to really sort of demonstrate that we want to get into the weeds of it and help out post the investment. It's not just about the capital, it's about the kind of support that we provide, non-financial support, mentorship, strategy guidance, product roadmap, talent, etc. And that's where we want to leave founders with that.
Those long form pieces from Theia are like on the short list of long form that I still read.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah, because there's so much. We're so awash with content now, right? All the time. Mm-hmm. I think our attention span has just gone to zero, and there's so much coming at us constantly in terms of information about the market. Even if you just dial into just the carbon market, that in itself is so large. Mm-hmm. I think within that noise, I've definitely been a fan of the long form pieces that you guys put out because they are very well detailed. They're very, very detailed, they're very thoughtful, and they're very comprehensive and kind of looking at it from an economic perspective, policy perspective, technical perspective. So mm-hmm. I think that's an interesting approach that you've chosen as a fund to not just go tell people that, hey, why don't you bring a deal to me? Let me evaluate it. It's more about actually creating a very strong, deep understanding of the market and saying, here's what we believe. Mm-hmm. Here's our contrarian truths. Now, you come and tell us what you have, right? And if we can find a match, great.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So creating that body of work to be discovered by the right set of founders also really, really important.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for the kind words. I think for us, we really want to be known as one of the thoughtful kind of thesis-led investors, people who actually spend the time developing that expertise so that we can give back to the founders,
For sure.
Because a lot of when a founder is pitching to an investor, literally about, I would say, 80% of the time it is the founder talking. And so we wanted to kind of, try to flip that narrative where it's us also sharing our thoughts,
having
giving
more
them
of a
suggestions.
conversation.
Yes, exactly. Right? Rather than a pitching session.
And it's very, very helpful. We are not even your portfolio company. And we get a lot of help from you and from Theia. Right? Which is really, really cool because that's actually how we build. That is how we reverse climate change. Right? It's a collaborative effort. From the very beginning, it has to be a collaborative effort. Mm-hmm. This is not a zero-sum game at all. So I really like that approach that you guys have taken. And as a B2B specific investor, I think there's a fourth stakeholder I haven't yet come to, which is enterprises. So there's consumers, there's consumer brands, there's funds, and then there is funds of financial institutions, and then there is a big enterprise, right? Traditional enterprise. Mm-hmm. What's their role in this GenC movement?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are, probably would classify as large corporations, organizations that have been around for a long time, have established processes, huge number of employees, many different verticals, and set policies, which are in some way, a little bit harder to to turn or influence. So I think there, and then coming back to the Patagonia example for, just to refer to, I think there really needs to be an innovation and a kind of spearheading from the top, from at a leadership level, to kind of really move the entire organization towards a climate friendly or sort of kind of carbon neutral goal. And it's not just about signing up for pledges and saying that, yes, we're going to be, cutting down X amount of sort of emissions to comply with particular guidelines set by the government, etc. It's really kind of something that really comes as core of the guiding principles of how that company wishes to operate and wishes to really, set an example for all of their, whether it's their suppliers, their customers, whether it's their service providers, employees and employee families, etc. So I think these organizations are not going to be the most agile or nimble folks. So amongst the list that you've mentioned, consumers, consumer brands, and funds, rather financial institutions, this final group of corporations or enterprises, they will need to take time to actually reset because they've been functioning for, decades on the same premise. So I think that there needs to be, and you've probably heard of this term, entrepreneur, right? Someone who is, very active, evangelical within the organization that actually maybe not at the leadership level, but is able to galvanize enough support internally to be able to get a group together to kind of propose policy changes or propose, sort of mission choices within the company that really challenge the status quo. And I think we've seen some examples of that in European companies as well, like Unilever and others, where there have been people coming into the organization that have really challenged what the organization has originally stood for. And then companies like Unilever have made, they're like with, large amounts of kind of pledges and sort of commitments.
2030, every label of Unilever products is going to be a true cost label.
Wow. Okay.
Every single product of theirs across the world will have a true environmental footprint.
Wow.
And that's the kind of commitment it takes a decade to put, together in action. You're right, it's driven by a champion who came in at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
Why not? It's not a question of why should we do this, it's a question of why not.
Exactly.
It has to be done. Right?
Yeah, and I think there's also often a kind of misconception or a fear that being more carbon neutral or climate friendly will incur additional cost. So there's often that view that, I think this falls under CSR, or I think this falls under like a cost center of the company in some way. But it's really important to identify that this is not a cost center. This is actually a very important part of growth.
It's an asset.
Yes, it's an asset. Exactly. So to try and flip that classification, I think it's really important to realize that if we don't become more sustainably aware and use more sort of environmentally sound or friendly or carbon reduction mechanisms, we're actually going to be losing out from a growth perspective. So I think that's really vital to bear in mind. And I think once we have a certain number of organizations taking the step forward, I think others will definitely follow. I think in the Indian context, one company I really admire is Mahindra, which has done this in a fantastic way from an early start, publishing reports that have a triple bottom line impact, and then building several verticals within the business that are focused on energy and renewables and climate impact, etc. So I think if there are some forward-thinking leaders like these, others will also follow.
And these are the challenger brands and challenger enterprises who set the trend.
Yeah.
They switch the narrative from, why should we do it? It'll be a cost, to why not? We have to do it. Let's instead think about like what we'll benefit from this if we do this. Right? And I think that forward thinking, that challenging the status quo, thinking of it as the core, like sustainability comes first, then comes the rest, rather than sustainability coming last. Right?
Yeah.
Those companies that are making that like very much part of their DNA are the ones that are going to thrive, because consumers are demanding it. People are demanding it from the companies they work at. Employees are getting more vocal about saying, how can my company not have any like sustainable practice? How can we just be a polluter, right? Investors are definitely demanding it from the companies they buy into. And governments are starting to also take note and step up and like put pressure, right? So I think this is such a vast, complex problem, but at the same time, like with the different stakeholders we've just mapped out, everybody's incentives have to be catered to.
Yeah.
Telling people that they must do it because it's a good to have, it's not enough. Like,
Yeah.
how do we make that happen while also making people want to do it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Brands, enterprises, funds, individuals, and then even the government.
Yeah. I think the crux there is really, at least for these players, except for government, it's really important to have an economic incentive. So we've all talked about the green premium, right? It is more expensive to go green at the moment than it is to stay brown, as it were. So I think the point is to try and make these choices more affordable, to try and make them more mainstream, and to see how we can innovate basically on cost to ensure that even people in various different geographies can actually adapt and make that conscious consumer choice. Right now, going green in India, really making that choice is something that I would say is mainly in a very small segment of the population. It really hasn't been able to sort of spread, dissipate, etc. So I think that entire sort of ambition, someone needs to take that on as a large challenge. How do we address tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities, and make those populations adapt to climate
because it can't
products?
just be, see, we only have like 6.5 years left, right? And I know in climate we end up talking about carbon a lot. It's definitely a waste problem too. It's a water problem. It's a pollution problem, right?
Sure.
But carbon is definitely the most urgent one in terms of the fact that it is directly correlated to rising sea levels, hurricanes, forest fires, whatnot. And a large percentage of humanity is affected by one of those problems now.
Right.
So
yeah,
specifically
exactly.
to that, we only have 6.5 years left before the climate clock runs out. And I think we're going to need a lot more people to be playing their part because they want to, right? It can't just be a few people who can afford to, but it has to be everybody in some form, whatever way they can. So how do we reach 1 billion people if just in India, rather than, the India 1 alpha, as it's called, the 10 million people who can afford to do so, paying that little bit of premium and paying a couple bucks more, like at a checkout to, buy some clients maybe.
Yeah.
How do we reach 1 billion people who may not be able to afford even that extra payment? Right? But still want to play their part and can.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day, what has been the sort of main revolution in India over the last few years. And I was thinking about digital penetration, about UPI, about payments, and how India's really kind of leapfrogged the rest of the world in its, ability to have every single vendor or supplier on UPI. So if there's, if we're able to reach that kind of digital penetration, if we have, platforms like Geo and 5G and others that are enabling this at a very rapid rate, there should be a way to also engage with that population on climate choices. So if there's a way even to use that digital penetration, whether it's through social media or whether it's through payments, to sort of get what we already have as a digitally enabled infrastructure and to build on top of that and give people the information and the awareness that these products are better for you in the long run than the ones that you're used to buying, at least the ones that have more synthetics, more plastics, more polluting aspects to them. If there's a way to kind of disseminate that knowledge, and that also starts by the way, with the education system. I think we need to fundamentally look at, how school curriculum subjects are really taught and how we can really embed in elements around climate change, and that will really breed the next generation of folks that are going to actually make a difference across the board, whether it's in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities.
And I think you've added a really important part of the delivery mechanism, right? This is the last mile connectivity. It's a question of how we reach that billion people. What's the distribution engine to get there? And we have to leverage the digital revolution that's happened in India, right? You're right. The UPI system, for example, is one of the best financial systems in the world today. And as a country, I think we've demonstrated that when we leapfrog really, really hard. Right?
Yeah.
So many people have gone from no phone to just a mobile phone, no landline in between.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And
exactly.
there are infinite examples like that in our country. So how do we go from not even knowing what climate change is to actually being like a climate champion?
Yeah.
And that can happen with really efficient delivery mechanisms, 1. 2, I think economic incentives, like you're saying. And 3, social incentives too, like look good. We are still a country that really likes to look good and is very status driven, right? And combining those pieces is a job of companies like ours, brands
Right.
who are catering the products that we buy, right? Enterprises whose companies people work at or whose products we also buy. And then the last one is the government, right? They have such a large part to play in this. Their
Yeah.
incentives are definitely aligned, but I think even they're looking for great solutions and how to enable solutions to scale,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
And this is kind of where I think the creation of policy to enable scaling of solutions kicks in. And the
Yeah.
Indian government, and like it's so admirable that some governments around the world, like the Indian government too, do actually preemptively create policy before the solution is fully like disseminated. Like
Yeah.
our biofuel policy or like our electric car FAME policy, right?
Yeah.
It's enabler policy before mass adoption happens.
Right. Right.
Right. And I think that kind of stacking onto this digital distribution system with great solutions, hopefully we see that change happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very positive about the general direction that the government is taking. Now that India has already taken, the G20 presidency forward for the next 12 months, I think climate will be a huge agenda. I think the motto is one family, one earth, one planet or one country. I think that is the tagline. But Earth is basically a very big part of the agenda. So I think whether it's like you said, biofuels, FAME, battery swapping, hydrogen, carbon, energy conservation, and also the renewables policies as well as various others. I think that there's huge amount of headway and being made within various ministries to actually kind of regulate and set mandates. And I think we'll actually be living in a very different India in 8 years' time. I'm fairly positive about that.
So do you think India and climate tech founders and teams from India are going to be the ones leading the charge globally?
Yeah, I mean, see, the thing is, without India, and I know this has been said, there isn't really a climate solution to the whole global problem of climate change. We are going to be the most populous country in a few months' time. We're going to be at 1.4, 1.5 billion. And I think the idea is that, in terms of the type of talent that already exists here, the type of access to natural resources, with 25% of India being covered in forests, huge amount of cultivable land. I think it's second only to the US, so a huge source of sustainable food, oceans, mangroves, big carbon sinks, as you probably know, and then also, a very sort of aware industry population. So I think there is coming back to the point around end of by enterprise, there has been some progress on, large industries committing towards carbon reduction by a certain time, etc. So even though India is a developing country, we are actually projected to be the third largest economy by 2027. So we are definitely poised to be one of the leaders in climate tech. I think there are a few areas that perhaps we need to catch up with countries like the US, Israel, Germany, UK on the technology innovation. I still think that on the deep tech front, there are some sort of additional funding, additional capital that might need to get poured into actually making some of these technologies best in class or globally recognizable. But as far as, kind of other ingredients go to making Indian climate tech founders and that whole ecosystem the leaders in the world, I think we're pretty much almost there.
I fully agree, and I'm super bullish on it too. And this is something we agree on even with our not-for-profit foundation, the Sustainability Mafia, right? At Sus Mafia, we keep saying an ecosystem of climate tech and sustainability entrepreneurs with solutions from India for the world.
Yeah,
right? And I really think we have to be the climate tech solution provider for the world, because not only are we the most at climate risk, in all countries along the equator at most at risk. In fact, India's social cost of carbon is the highest in the world, $85 a ton.
Wow.
So with each additional ton of carbon dioxide emitted, the net damage to India's GDP is $85, highest. Right? I think second highest is the US at $45, and then Qatar or Saudi Arabia, if I'm not wrong, at $40. So that means we're most at risk. We are the most populous, right? But we also have incredible creativity.
Yeah.
Right? And hunger to solve problems.
Yes.
And that's starting to happen. We're seeing such incredible climate tech entrepreneurs all around the country now. Right? I think too early to say, but still I'm going to call it it's boom time for climate tech.
Yeah.
And it's the first time where it's actually an industry with solutions that like align planet and profit and purpose. And there's a committed timeline we have to do this in. Right? There is an end expiration date. If we don't solve it by then, we're anyways off the cliff.
Yeah, exactly,
Right?
exactly.
So within this, who are some of the founders or companies that you have found that you just think are like leading the charge, and you're really, really proud to have, found them in your journey, or like you're just a happy observer. But are there any names of companies you think are doing a fantastic job at leading us this Gen Z movement?
Yes, absolutely. So there is one company that we've all heard of because we see them, on our roads, etc., which is Blue Smart Mobility.
We
So
love
I'm
Blue
huge,
Smart.
huge
Yeah.
fan of them. I think they started, very early before the climate tech revolution really took off or exploded rather. So we've been following them since 2020, 21, and I think it's really admirable what they've built in terms of really challenging the status quo, challenging existing,
Absolutely. They're
kind
a
of fuel ride
penultimate like
sharers.
challenger brand.
Yes, yes,
Right? They took on
exactly.
an Uber and an Ola.
Yes. So and I think they will actually come neck to neck with them in
Yeah.
various different cities. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what they're going to be building. Another company which I've been, admiring as well throughout its long journey is actually Smart Jewels, which is run by Arjun, who we know well. And I really sort of admire the kind of careful thought process in which he's looked at essentially the cooling solutions, the retrofit, and the type of clientele that he's gone after. And I think energy efficiency is going to be a very important consideration for the entire sort of carbon reduction agenda. So I think
It's one of the highest
great.
contributors, right, in the entire stack of carbon emissions globally. Cooling
Yes,
systems.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So if that can be applied to various different industries, I think that would be great. And then there are a few companies I think also in the deep tech space, like for example in battery chemistry and energy storage that we've been observing as well. And I think obviously the work of Climbs too as one of the big, movers and shakers in the consumer B2B2C platform play. I think you've definitely created that huge amount of awareness and visibility for sort of brands to take the charge on leading the next wave of conscious products essentially. And I really like the way you've actually kind of partnered with some really interesting sector, various different sectors, whether it's apparel or travel or mobility or others, to sort of really see how you can kind of make sustainability that default choice. So these are some examples, and I think there's so many more that
Yeah.
I want.
What about your portcos? Thank you for that. By the
Sure.
way, we're still too early in our journey. But yeah, it's wonderful that we're finding partners who are challenger brands who are willing to actually take on that mantle, right, and fight the good fight. And in that, really making sustainability part of their own DNA. And they're just like part of their journey in that, right? But it's
Yeah.
wonderful that change can happen from anywhere. And more brands are getting on board that bandwagon.
Yeah, exactly.
But what about your
No,
portfolio companies? Would love
so
to know about
yeah,
any.
each of our portfolio companies is very different in their own way. So many of them are at early stages and still kind of, sort of onboarding customers and growing and scaling up their value proposition. I think they're each kind of very different, but there's one company called Sheru, which I just wanted to kind of address because I think what they're building is quite visionary. They started out as a battery swapping play for e-rickshaws, but I think they built a really interesting software layer over the hardware and middleware, which has allowed kind of an analytics overview of how each battery is being used essentially. And they figured out a way for grid companies or discoms to basically I would say knowledge or visibility into that analytics and help them regulate their sort of deficits. Whenever there is a deficit on the grid, they can pull energy from those batteries. So it's kind of a virtual energy storage
And they
product.
call themselves the AWS of
Yes.
energy, right? It's
Yes,
super
that's right.
interesting,
Yeah.
that term.
So great team, and we're super excited to be involved with them. And then all our portfolio companies are great. I won't go into every single one, but I just wanted to give some thought process about, the kinds of things that we look at that are very valuable in terms of, how these companies are basically being movers and shakers in the industry.
And I think I actually want to just double click on materials within your portfolio too. Materials
Yes.
because they kind of just they operate in the shadows. People forget that materials are such a big part of our built environment and our world. And we kind of always focus on the energy players and the carbon players and, you know, waste as well. But materials, the ones who are actually creating alternative materials
Right.
that are disposable or have less carbon footprint from point of production, right?
Yes.
Or are more water efficient. That is making such a huge difference. And now there are such interesting materials companies out there. So how did you choose to double down on that as a thesis too?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we think of materials as basically applying to various different sectors. So there's obviously textiles, which we've already invested in a company called Canvaloup, which basically develops sustainable fibers, textile fibers from agricultural waste fibers, and then spins them into yarn, which then can be used for garment production. But there are, material innovation that also happens in, packaging, for example. So you have either the existing plastic that can be re-engineered to become reusable, or you can use waste production or waste from agricultural crops. Like there's, obviously there's rice, there's paddy, there's various different other kinds of packaging content or input raw material. But then there's also, ocean products such as seaweed. These products can also be used in, for example, construction materials as well. Not the ocean ones, but the agricultural waste products, etc. And
Like
India
hemp.
has a huge, and hemp, yes.
Yeah.
So I think India has a huge, I would say, raw material supply and landscape and sort of feedstock capability to kind of build on these alternative materials. I think we just need kind of the sort of technology and the validation and viability of a lot of these materials companies need to be verified by various different experts to make sure that they're durable and they have the same qualities and strength and tensile strength, etc., that conventional synthetic material would.
And adoption. I think that's a big one.
Yeah,
There
exactly.
are adopters who are willing to test your product out and be the first enabler of it toward their consumers.
Yeah.
That's really the need of the hour, right? So again, it becomes a distribution problem. I think solutions we're innovating with enough, and really, really great solutions around the country now.
Yeah.
But in terms of end adoption, I think there's so much that can be done, and that's where this GenC piece really focuses on the adoption of solutions. Like who are the people adopting them, right? At the end of the day, it's end consumers, whether they're buying from brands or enterprises. If people want it, brands will do it. Right? If people want it, brands will change the materials that they also source into their apparel or into their packaging. And we're seeing that shift happen where people are starting to demand it more and say, I am GenC and I care and I want more.
Yeah.
Right? But how do we accelerate? And I think that's something I'd really like to understand from you too. How do we make people want it even more? How do we make people like scream and shout about it openly and say, I am GenC? Like, that's who I am.
Yeah, I think, there is also a concept of to make things attractive, from a vast consumer mindset. We need some kind of endorsements or, large celebrity level intervention here as well. So I think I think it would be great if these kinds of conversations are blended into, mainstream discourse. So whether it's a talk show or whether it's a movie or whether it's these kind of platforms where people come together and discuss, various different topics, I think there could be quite a lot of impact that could be created if there were famous people or people who have some kind of clout in on a national stage to be able to talk about these choices and then get the mass population to adopt. That's, in my view, kind of like a soft power element that we might have.
It is straight up soft power, and I think it kind of falls into the camp of something we internally keep talking about too, which is you got to make climate action sexy, right?
Yeah.
Only when it's sexy will people really want to do it.
Yeah.
And in that sexy, how do you have an economic incentive and at the same time have a social incentive to do so?
Yeah.
So what do you think is one economic incentive that the average household Indian would want to, practice more climate positive choice? No, I don't think anybody will do it just because it's more sustainable. I think it has to be equal utility, if not more, and then
Yeah,
happen to be more climate positive too,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
then on top of that, if
absolutely.
there's an economic incentive, that's a no-brainer,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
right?
So, see, the thing is that economic incentives could be linked to various different things. I mean, for example, in solar, there have been subsidies that have been put in for solar usage, so people have opted for those because it's just easier. Or, for example, there's cashback that comes from government when you input your energy into the grid and you get a cashback. So I think those kinds of incentives have been done in the past. I would say that, the kinds of instruments that you're building, for example, is trying to give people access to, a coin or ability to actually use something that they can then reward themselves with afterwards is quite attractive if they are aware of how that whole process works. So that could be something interesting. I think also, from a social angle as well, we know that Indians are really passionate about education. Everybody wants their kid to go to an IIT or to go to a good college. If there's a way to kind of blend in that social objective and achievement objective with a kind of climate achievement as well, that could be quite a big one. So I mean, I think thinking about how to blend in climate education, as I mentioned before, into curriculum to make that a very important part of your climbing up the social ladder in a way, getting into a good college, getting into a good job, and then eventually earning for your family. You should be seen as someone who is a climate warrior as well as someone who is, a high achiever and like able to earn
Yeah,
lots of money.
and make that aspirational in a way, right? Because
Yeah.
we are and it's a very good thing. We're a very ambitious country. We're a nation full of aspirational people
Yeah.
who are also very socially aware, right?
Yes.
Of
Yes.
who they
About
are, where
what
they
their
are.
neighbor is doing. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think the education route that you mentioned is really interesting because as a nation, we kind of always had that EVS or EVE, right? Environmental science and environmental education. Very early on in school. Most people have had it in the CBSE, ISC, ICSE curriculum, right? Or even IB. And I think that early exposure to it somewhere planted the seed, but then gets lost along the way. How
Yeah.
does it become more of a lifelong education?
Yeah.
I think is a really, really interesting one to figure out. For any solution provider who's thinking of, hey, like where is an opportunity? And the second piece of it that you mentioned is make it feel really good, right? How can society reward me for doing this? So one of
Yeah.
clients' contrarian beliefs from very early on has been climate worthiness can be the new credit worthiness. And if we actually make people get rewarded in society by how much, like how sustainably they're living, wouldn't
Yeah.
that be amazing? We'd all want to be more sustainable than our neighbors.
Yeah. That's true. That's a really important kind of, aspiration potentially. So
How
if
cool would
that
that be, right? If we actually say, no, that family is
is not sustainable, we're
ours
better
is
than
more.
them.
And then it's a
Yeah.
competition, right, between like
Yeah.
everybody and net planet benefits.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think these are like lofty aspirational goals to get to, but that's really how, at least in our thinking, we reach this short timeline end goal.
Yeah, but it's not that lofty in a way. I was actually just thinking about some Scandinavian countries that really pride themselves on being climate conscious and, taking public transport and being extremely aware of emissions. And I think if there are certain pockets here that can actually try to emulate what they've done in Scandinavia, I think it can be definitely achievable.
We hope so too, and we hope to find them and uncover them, and work with them in this GenC movement.
Yeah.
We're here. We're here. There's many other climate tech companies now that are also there with great solutions, looking to get adopted. And we're really happy that it's definitely far more. The number of people in this GenC movement is far more than it was a year ago. It's far more than 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Definitely far more than in 2019.
Yeah.
Right. So we're headed in the right direction, but I think it's just that the curve needs to like exponentially rise, and it needs to be linked to incentives for everybody in it.
Yeah.
Without incentives, nobody's going to care. And yeah, so it's a
Yeah.
lot of it is incentive design too.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. Yeah.
And just to kind of close it out and sum it up in terms of incentives, Theia coming in now, being built over the last year and a half,
Yeah, it's nearly 2 years. Yeah.
nearly 2 years. You are you've got your portfolio. You are very much out there looking for more climate tech founders to make bets on and
Yeah.
support in their journey. Play the next 10 years out. Like, how do you, what will you feel satisfied with? 10
Yeah,
years from
absolutely.
now, when have we succeeded in your opinion, or when have we completely failed as a species?
Yeah. You mean as a country, right? Or
What is a
as a
species?
Gen Z, yeah, or as a species. Absolutely. No, I think 10 years is, I mean, it feels like a long time, but actually time creeps up on us very quickly. See, I would like to see a majority of the startup ecosystem, at least in India, having a climate angle, right? I would like to see, even if someone is starting a fintech company or an edtech company, there has to be some kind of environmental or climate play there. So
It's like the
that
green startup
consciousness.
pledge that ACT and BCG got
Yes.
together, and how that can be an enabler for it too.
Yeah, so I would like every single new founder to come into the tables and think, what can I do that has a climate angle that can really benefit the planet? And I would like, as a species, for us to really feel the burn and feel the urgency of, yes, we are in a danger zone right now. We are going to get to, say, 2 degrees. How are we going to prevent a further escalation after that? Like the IPCC report has mentioned. So, being able to have that sense of kind of not, I wouldn't say we should be driven by fear, but we should be driven by a sense of mission, a sense of kind of a palpable sense of kind of drive that something needs to be done about this. So making those, as I talked about earlier, those choices on mobility, on waste, on clothes, on food, and everything kind of moving towards a much more sustainable lifestyle. And that is the future at the end of the day. I mean, if worst comes to worst, we have to take off and find another planet. And I don't know if everyone on this planet, the the 7 or 8 billion of us that will be part of this earth in, say, 10 years or 15 years, will have that option, right? So I think it's imperative for us to make that transition. And my vision is really to see everyone that I speak to, even on a casual conversation or as a professional contact, etc. I would like them to be aware of this fact.
Wow. I mean, that's a wonderful way to close this out. Everybody you come in contact with should leave converted.
Yes, I hope so.
Some or the other, right? They should leave you feeling converted and adopt some form of climate into their lives, whether it's in terms of the work they do or the choices they make in terms of consumption or
Yeah.
the way they invest, right? And use
Yeah.
your money into more climate positive companies.
Yeah.
There's so many leverage points.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Lovely conversation, Priya. Thank you so much for being with us today on this episode of The Voice of Gen Z. It's been incredible.
Thank you. Thank you, Annie and the Climbs team for having me. I really loved the conversation.
Thanks a lot, Priya.
Thank
Now you can
you.
just stay back here.
Okay.
Yeah, Priya and Sabah.